And blessed to be with you, Kevin Miller in the morning here, KIDO Talk Radio. Max and Liberty Linda, hang on. We're joined by the truth teller, best-selling author, terrorism expert, Brigitte Gabriel, who loves Idaho. Hello, how are you?
Good morning, Kevin. Delighted to be back with you again.
How you been?
Doing great. Working very hard, traveling and speaking, promoting my new book, Rise, and it's been amazing.
Well, I can't wait to talk about that because we've been talking about the end of men as we know it. But first, your thoughts on all these packages being sent in the mail.
Well, the one thing is, have you noticed how since this whole talk about the packages sent in the mail, we have not seen one picture, one story, one reference to the caravan, to the horde of mobs heading into the United States right now? This story was so convenient for the Democrats that I wouldn't even put it past the left to have done this to themselves just to get off the story about the mob heading to the United States off the TV screen. And here is why. Because people in America watching that horde of mobs heading to the United States were realizing we're going to lose our country. And this is exactly, even the independents were out going to vote for nationalism and to protect the country because this is about our national identity. But these whole packages were conveniently sent at the perfect time to all the right people to completely distract from the story about the mob and turn it against Trump. And that's exactly, they got what they wanted.
Yes, they did. And, Brigitte, if you could you share with the folks here how many times your life has been threatened?
Well, I can tell you the first white powder envelope I received was in 2005 in Washington, D.C., where I was speaking at America's Truth Forum, and all the speakers, we were at the Hyatt Hotel in Arlington, Virginia, and all the speakers got envelopes with white powder in them, Amtrak with our name on it, to where the FBI had to come, put us all in the kitchen and brief us as to do not open anything, do not talk to anything, don't even eat anything at the hotel. And this was back in 2005. So people like me who are in the public eye are used to dealing with things like that. My life, I had 3 people from the Joint Terrorism Task Force in my home 8 months ago telling me that an ISIS cell was dispatched out of New York to kill me. So, when you speak against evil, this is the type of stuff that you have to deal with. But the sad reality in our country right now, Kevin, is even good people who do not want to have anything to do with politics. Look at the family of Donald Trump, his children, and their wives, and his grandchildren getting envelopes with white powder. Remember just a few months ago, Eric and Don Jr. and their family, Laura Trump, Eric Trump's wife, opened up the envelope with the white powder in her face. So this is the sad thing when they start doing this to people who, just innocent people who are not even doing anything.
Indeed, and we never hear of these things, but we're hearing nonstop news about these packages, and now people are blaming the president.
The president has nothing to do with it. And if you look at history and the track record of who commits violence in this country, look, a lot of people did not agree with President Obama, including myself. I couldn't even stand him. But as much as I could not stand the man, I respected the office. And people stood up and voiced their opinion, and they mobilized. Look at the Tea Party. The Tea Party was launched after Obama because they wanted to mobilize on the right, and they wanted to exercise their freedom of expression peacefully. They showed up to Washington, D.C. by the hundreds of thousands and even cleaned the garbage after themselves. But you did not see violence. You did not see people going out, and committing violence the way we're seeing now. This whole violence is a result of the Democrats for the last 2 years inciting violence, telling people if you see them in restaurants, stop them, create a mob around you, intimidate them, tell them they're not welcomed here. I mean, Hillary Clinton coming on television last week saying that, we're not going to have civil discourse, we're not going to have civil order until hopefully we win the House and Senate. And now, all of a sudden, after all this incitement, they were telling people inciting violence. Look at Antifa attacking people, showing up to rallies with machete and knives and brass knuckles, threatening people and attacking them. Nobody talked about that. Look, last year, my organization, Act for America, last summer, we were going to have a rally titled America First. And we timed it with September 11th because we wanted to bring out Americans united, waving their American flags, celebrating America and American exceptionalism, saying we put America first. We organized rallies in 67 cities across 38 states. I had to cancel the rallies a month and a half before the weekend of September 11th because Antifa sent us emails saying, we're going to mow your people down in our cars like ants. I had to cancel 67 rallies in 67 cities nationwide because we needed to protect the lives of Americans that Antifa was going to show up with knives and drive over them with cars. And of course, nobody talks about that stuff. That's, you know, the Democrats could care less about the story back then. But now everybody is up in arms. That's exactly why I wrote my book, Rise, Rise in Defense of Judeo-Christian Values and Freedom. People need to understand how we're losing the country, what's happening in our country, and what we can do peacefully and democratically to come together and become more engaged, become more active to protect our country.
Our great friend, Brigitte Gabriel, joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning. So let's talk a little bit about, a lot about Rise and the end of Western Christian, Judeo-Christian civilization.
Well, you know, I wrote the book, Rise in Defense of Judeo-Christian Values and Freedom because Judeo-Christian values are the bedrock of Western civilization. That's what made Western civilization great. This book is not a religious book. This book is a secular book talking about what made Western civilization great. Our freedom of speech, let's reason together. This is why we are able to sit around and debate ideas and agree to disagree, thinking, okay, I'm going to learn something from whoever I was having a debate with. Where do you think that comes from? It comes from the Bible. Come, let's reason together. This is where the freedoms that we have in Western countries, even if you don't want to call them Judeo-Christian values, if people don't even realize where they came from, this is where they came from. This is why we have the freedom of speech, freedom of expression, freedom to gather and come together. This is where the Constitution and the rights that we have, this is where they come from. This is how they were formed. And that's what made Europe great. That's what made Western civilization great. That's what made America great. And right now we are seeing the erosion of these freedoms. We're seeing the lies that are being taught to our children in public schools.
And not only that, Bridget, if you speak out about it, you're an extremist, you're a bad person, and they censor the good people in America today.
Well, they do. And thank God for people like you, Kevin, and your shows and talk radio, that people like me and you can be the voice of millions of Americans who listen to us and get to hear the truth and get to hear what we're talking about. Because this is important. You know, people wake up and say, how did we end up with Antifa? I mean, these are kids who are born and raised in America, went to American schools, got an American education. But we end up with people like Antifa because the textbooks have been brainwashing our children in public schools. One chapter in my book, Rise, is titled Operation Indoctrination. And in that chapter, I talk about how children, what they're growing up now learning in our public schools, our children right now growing up learning that their country was founded on racism, bigotry, oppression, and genocide. We cannot expect them to fight for the freedom it gave to them if they do not know the truth. One book in particular I discuss in that chapter is a book by Howard Zinn titled A People's History of the United States. The entire book, Kevin, is an attempt to prove that America is an evil empire based on white supremacy and the oppression and genocide of minorities. It mentions absolutely nothing about American exceptionalism. At least Zinn was open about the fact that his goal in writing the book was to start what he says, quote, a quiet revolution. That is one that transforms society and leads to the eventual overthrow of American institutions. And that's exactly what we are seeing Antifa and Black Lives Matter wants to do. As a matter of fact, when I continue talking in the book, that textbook issue is so dire that Arizona actually had to pass a law to stop schools from teaching classes that promote the overthrow of the United States of government.
Brigitte Gabriel joining us. Kevin Miller in the morning, 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio. So we haven't talked about the caravan yet. We do want to get back to Rise, but I have to ask you, You know the Turks. You know the Saudis. Your objective opinion on what happened to that reporter, and why does the press care so much about him when you had what happened to Daniel Pearl not get the same type of coverage?
Look, this is exactly what the Arabs and royal families and royal regimes in the Middle East do all the time. This is a daily, regular occurrences. How come people are not complaining about what's happening? Look, Syria killed, how many people did Assad kill in his regime? Remember the Muslim Brotherhood when they took over Egypt, what they were doing? How many people were killed in Iran? And we are making this big brouhaha about this one reporter simply because he worked for the Washington Post. This thing happens in Saudi Arabia all the time. Do you know that the Saudis have 6 executionists on staff that work for the government, and their job daily is to behead people? How come we don't want to talk about that if all of a sudden we're talking about human rights? But this is nothing more than a political, the left is using this as a political opportunity to make the Saudis look bad, to make Trump look bad, to frame Trump and he's friends with the Saudis. Their whole shtick about Russia did not work, and that's why the leftist media is grabbing the story about this Saudi man who's a reporter to the Washington Post. Look, if the guy was not a reporter to the Washington Post, you wouldn't hear a word about him. His name would not be mentioned, and the world would have forgotten about the story.
What about the caravan?
The caravan, we're very concerned about it because we know that terrorists have infiltrated the caravan, and that's just common sense. We know that Iran has command centers set up in Central America controlled by Hezbollah, where they have actually been bringing people from the Middle East, training them in these command centers, and actually training them to speak Spanish so they can be smuggled into the United States. When you have been hearing our intelligence agencies report about OTMs for the last decade coming through the Mexican border, they are talking about other than Mexicans, OTM, which refers to Middle Easterners. So this is no surprise. But if you look at what's happened in Europe with the refugees, with the terrorists that came to Europe under the refugees, you'll understand why we're concerned about the caravan. The Brussels terror attacks were carried by fake refugees. The train shooting between Amsterdam and Paris was done by a fake refugee. The Berlin Christmas market car mowdown, remember last Christmas in Germany? That was carried by a Tunisian asylum seeker. The Ariana Grande concert attack was carried by the son of a refugee in 2017. And we don't even have to look at Europe. In the United States, as I discussed in my book Rise, no less than 10 plus terror plots and attacks were carried out by terrorists who entered the country as refugees. Most famous are the Tsarnaev brothers in Boston. Exactly this time, 1 year ago, let's not forget about the man from Uzbekistan that mowed down people in New York City on the sidewalk. He was a refugee. So it's common sense, and we know that refugees have infiltrated this caravan, or so-called bad agent and terrorists have infiltrated this caravan, and that's why we cannot let this caravan get into the United States. As a matter of fact, I have a whole chapter in my book Rise titled Terror at the Gates, where I discuss how the terrorists have been able to use the whole refugee problem, the Syrian refugee problem, and different refugee problems around the world to infiltrate Western societies, but especially in the United States, and all the terrorist attacks and plots that were foiled in America that were done by so-called people who entered into the United States, either illegally coming through the border or overstaying their visas, or who have come under the refugee status and turned out attacking the United States.
Rise, Brigitte Gabriel's new book. Hopefully we'll see you in Idaho soon.
I would love that.
Have a great day.
Thank you, you too.
All right, bye-bye. We appreciate her. My man Max held on. He's next. KIDO Talk Radio. A tough act to follow, young man.
Well, let me tell you what, my young friend. Brigitte Gabriel is a real American hero. She's a woman with the fortitude to stand up and say it like it is. Between the alien invasion on our borders and this incredible rise in violent hate, almost always connected to the Democratic Party, what's it doing? It's putting our society under siege. President Trump is our last great hope for a strong, kind, and free America. Would you agree?
Yes.
This next election is so important. People, listen to me. put down your coffee, and instead of stopping off at Starbucks, stop off at your local grade school or wherever there's a voting booth and cast your vote. Like, if you don't let yourself be heard, no one's going to listen in the future. And look at this, all of these suspicious packages. Doesn't that sound a lot like Diane Feinstein and her rape letter? Isn't the timing just delicious? They are so doggone desperate. This, I believe, is the death rattle of the Democratic Party. It's the death rattle. They're in their last throes. They are on the point of dissolving. They are a full court press with the media to do anything and everything they can to influence the simple-minded among you. If you're simple-minded, don't listen to me. Just the heck with that. You'd be better in chains anyway. And could I bring up one more little topic?
Only because it's you, Max. By the way, you're listening to 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio with our friend Max. Go ahead.
And the Kevin Miller Show. Don't forget that.
Thank you, brother.
No, there's a movie out about the abortion king of America. What's the name of that? Gressler or something like that?
Gosnell?
Yeah, that's the one. I know a doctor in China, personally know him, who puts Grosnell to shame. And I'm going to name him Dr. Wang Liu of Central Hospital in Shenyang. Well over 2 million infant murders to his credit. This guy comes in the morning, murders a half a dozen babies, has a coffee break, murders another half a dozen babies, and he's been doing it for 20 years. And when the new two-child policy, oh, there's a joke, came in, it was basically Beijing passing the buck to the province and saying, you guys decide if you want to allow 2 children, that's okay. And, of course, none of them does because they're run by hardliners from the old regime. Doctors like Dr. Liu Wang are murdering millions. I could pick out 5 doctors in one city who outnumber the United States abortions combined. People, if you're buying Chinese goods, if you're working with Chinese government, Chinese corporations, if you're expanding your factory to China, you know what you're doing? You're just putting a death sentence on so many million more innocent babies. Because remember this, life begins at conception. In China, they can legally terminate a child. How old do you think? What do you think is the maximum age there, my friend?
Got me.
Age 6.
Well, I'm
wake you up?
I'm glad I don't live in China. Thank you for the call, Max.
Thank you, sir.
Liberty Linda joins us now. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Liberty Linda. Hello.
Good morning, Kevin, our one and only Kevin. The best. Anyway, while we debate with the Democrats, and we certainly don't believe in their politics, that's one thing, Kevin. However, we do not want to hurt anyone. Having said that, I actually believe someone on their side sent these bombs out to bring down our president. I truly believe that. And to interfere with this election, to hate the Republicans, and there are people, some of those are on the borderline, that's what they're going to think. And from the very first second, I didn't believe a conservative did. And, well, anyway, I'm not a reporter, Kevin, so I can say that.
Well, I believe the reporters want it to be a conservative.
Well, yeah, the Democrat reporters do. Absolutely. Look what they're doing. They're doing all this on the television, causing with all these rumors to be started, and we see it happening. We know what it's about. But anyway, I hope the person gets caught, and I believe when he does get caught, he will be a liberal. And, of course, not Liberal Steve, though. Liberal Steve is, he's liberal. We don't believe in most of the stuff he believes in. But I know Liberal Steve as a good person. I like Liberal Steve. I always have since first day I met him. But anyway, now with the caravan, now we see that they're breaking up and they're going to come into the United States all across our southern border. So they know if they come across in San Diego, we're going to have the military there. So how are we going to be able to protect the United States when they're breaking up and coming in from everywhere? What are we going to do, Kevin?
Well, I'll tell you, I lived in those states, and shame on the local governments for not taking care of it. I will tell you, it was about 25 years ago. I was working the place where Sean Hannity worked 5 years before me, and we were donating Christmas presents, and we went to, they called it Little Mexico, and it was a 1,300, maybe 1,000 square foot house, and you had 15 people living in it. And, you know, this happens in the Treasure Valley, happens everywhere. Liberty Linda, I'll talk about it more, but I've got to run. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. You're listening to Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. Quickly to security guard Mike. You're on with Kevin Miller, 107.5 FM, 580 AM. Good morning.
Hi there, Mr. Kevin Miller. It's great talking to you again. Hey, I just wanted to give you a call, and I was just concerned about this wonderful fake bomb that I think was actually sent by the Democrats to take the minds off the caravan that's coming at us before this election. Unbelievable. How low will these people go? How low will they stoop to win an election that they aren't going to win? Because the American people are woke. We're woke. We're not going to fall for this craziness anymore. It's unbelievable, Kevin Miller. I just cannot believe it. Anyway, I just want to tell you that. That's my opinion. And thank you for allowing me to state that out. Kevin Miller, you're the best. I love you. And have a wonderful, great Kevin Miller day.
We love you, security guard Mike. Take care.
Yeah, bye-bye, buddy.
Bye-bye. Let's find out what's happening in your world. 107.5 FM, 580 AM, KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Maggie. And Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. We care about our community. Joining us now, State Senator Stephen Thane of Emmett, District 8. It's been a while. How you been?
Been great. How have you been, Kevin?
Senator, still employed, which is always a blessing these days.
Yes, it is.
Hey, let's talk a little bit about the changing landscape of your beloved state, Idaho. You're a farmer. You're an elected state senator. You love this area. We got a lot of things going on, and it's moving into Emmett, too. A lot of new subdivisions, people coming out there, homes, land going up. Your thoughts on the changing dynamic of the Treasure Valley, sir?
Well, I think there's potential for change without question when you move more people into the state. We'll have to make some adjustments, probably make it harder for young people to get into homes, so housing costs will undoubtedly go up. We've seen that recently. And then we could have some cultural shifts that are probably more problematic and worry me the most. There's potential for cultural shifts.
Well, the libs are coming in, but what does it say about are we in danger of losing our great agriculture base?
Well, that's an interesting question because 63% of the state of Idaho is controlled by the federal government, so that only leaves 37% either state land or privately owned land. And a lot of that, the growth is seen in agricultural areas in Canyon County, around Ada County, Meridian. Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think the problem's quite as big in the Magic Valley or further eastern, in eastern Idaho, but, I lived in Utah, well, it was probably 40 years ago. And now there's houses from Tremont and clear to south of Provo, and there isn't very much agricultural ground left down there, at least not in that area. So are we going to see something like that in the future? Well, possibly.
Well, you think it's a good thing? I mean, I see, and I've been here over 9 years. That's not a lot of time, Senator Thane, but I see, Eagle Road building up. You got the Village 1, maybe the Village 2. You got 10 Mile, Chinden, all these areas, all these arteries that are being clogged. I mean, that's right in your neighborhood, what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we just had a new stoplight go up on Beacon Road. And, of course, that didn't make a lot of people from Emmett too happy. Probably does people locally. But roads are an issue. And, and where we're going to find fundings for roads, we probably need a belt route to the south of the Boise, Treasure Valley area. But we have a proposition on the ballot that might suck up a lot of that those funds that we need.
Well, and we'll get to Medicaid expansion in a second, but it's very rare that we get a chance to yap to you because you're always working at this time. And we will talk about Medicaid expansion and others. How do you see this general election? That primary sure was contentious. Brad Little emerging. Now, I guess Emmett will be the Western White House, if you will. Your thoughts on some of the major races?
Well, this is kind of interesting because Brad Little and I went to high school together. We graduated from the same year in 1972. So I've known Brad and his wife and his kids. We have kids the same age. I think that Lieutenant Governor Little will be our next governor. I think the Republicans are probably going to sweep most of the offices, statewide offices. The only one that might be competitive is the superintendent race, which tends to be more. However, as much as we get complaints about education, there's a pretty good feeling going on in education. So I think Sherry Ybarra will probably pull off the election. And as far as the legislature, there might be a change, one or two, but I think it's pretty stable too. We'll probably get more of what we've had. In order to really have much change, the voters have to be really dissatisfied, and I'm not sure what they would be dissatisfied with. I mean, generally, there are voters that are dissatisfied with issues here and there, but most voters, I think, are fairly satisfied with what we're going to, and they like the working attitude of the Idaho legislature and the leadership of Republican candidates. That's my view.
Senator Thane joining us, Stephen Thane of Emmett, Kevin Miller in the morning, KIDO Talk Radio. Now, we're hearing a lot about these propositions, so let's talk about Medicaid expansion. We got a story in the Statesman today saying the only way to save the country or rural hospitals is Medicaid expansion. Otherwise, they're going to close. Your thoughts?
Oh, I think it's totally wrong. Utah has a similar proposition to expand Medicaid. And the current governor of Kentucky said, in 2013, when his predecessor unilaterally expanded Medicaid, promises filled the air. And I see them from going to save our rural hospitals, we'll cut down emergency room visits and all this. And it won't come at much cost. But it goes on to say that there's a $300 million hole in the Kentucky state budget, largely because of Medicaid expansion. The predictions of sign-ups were off by 134%. That's not 34%. That's 134%. So instead of 188,000 enrollees, they had 439,000. So, and that's not unique to Kentucky. Medicaid expansion projections have been 76% more than expected, and the costs have missed the mark by 157%. So the costs are going to be greater, but that's really not my focus. My focus is more on how it's going to change the culture of the state of Idaho. I recognize that there's a problem with access to health care for the poor, and I've actually been working on a solution for that for the last 6 years. And I think we have better alternatives out there than Proposition 2. So if you'd like to hear some of my reasons, I'd be more than happy to share with you what I think is problematic with Prop 2.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Well, the first, it will not improve the overall health of the poor. There's a difference between access to health care and wellness. Wellness is a function of many small choices that each one of us makes every day. For example, there's nothing in the design of Medicaid that encourages recipients not to smoke or to exercise. Reason number two, almost all federal poverty programs, including Medicaid, have a serious design flaw. A person has to stay under certain income levels to stay eligible. This requirement incentivizes long-term intergenerational poverty. And there's no expectation in the design of the program for a recipient to get out of poverty. This robs the individual of vitality of life, and I think it harms their emotional well-being too. The third reason, for the reasons just mentioned, it has the potential to alter the culture of Idaho. You know, when people say Idaho is such a great place, well, what really makes it a great place? For me, it's the expectation that every individual will contribute to his own well-being and add to their community. And I'm afraid that Prop 2 will move us more to California or Portland or Seattle culture. I think we can take care of those in need a different way. The fourth reason is government programs and government interference in the past have created many problems of the present. There were wage and price controls in the 1950s that led to health care being associated with the benefits of employment. That was, I think, a serious mistake. That didn't really drive up healthcare costs until more recently, but then Medicare and Medicaid in the 1960s. Since then, medical costs have started climbing quite consistently. And then obviously in 2010 when we had Obamacare. And so I see past government interventions in the market as causing most of our current problems. And is it reasonable to believe that expanding a poorly designed government program will suddenly cause that program to work because we expand it? It doesn't make sense to me. I think we're going to find there's unintended consequences. P.T. Barnum said something one time toward the end of his life. He was asked what he had learned, and he said, I didn't realize how much people wanted to be lied to. We want to believe what we want to believe. But when you look at the facts of the case, this is not going to improve the health of the poor. It's not going to get people out of poverty. It is going to cut into the state budget. It's going to cost more than what it's anticipated.
All right.
And there's two other reasons.
Well, Senator Thane, we've run out of time, but we appreciate you, brother.
Okay, well, I appreciate the time. And, if people want to learn more about my thinking, they can go to roadtovenezuela.com and download a free book and get all the reasons why I think Medicaid expansion is not a good idea.
Senator Thane, thank you.
I appreciate the time.
We appreciate you. Thank you, sir. All right, there we go. Let's go to Lee Joe in Boise with Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Lee Joe.
Good morning, Kevin. So here we are talking about how fast we're growing around this valley again and where we're growing at. We've got, I work in the industry that builds all these subdivisions, and I've plowed up more cornfields and alfalfa fields than a guy ought to in his whole lifetime. And part of the reason we keep plowing up this ag ground is because folks like Dave Beater decide we can't develop the foothills, okay? And our Compass planning, all these, consensus planning groups won't push development to the South Desert. We're turning all this ag ground into non-productive ground, and we're going to destroy an entire industry. We are going to have subdivisions from here to Ontario, and I know it because I'm building them. A person has a right to their private property and to do with what they wish. However, their forefathers have put in an irrigation system in here for the purpose of having an agricultural economy. And there's no reason not to put, to force development north and south of town where we have, an empty freeway coming from Mountain Home, and we've got we just won't push the infrastructure down there where it makes sense to push it down and save these agricultural areas. And, we're not going to stop expansion. Now, the price of housing, it's been going up, and Californians and everybody else that moves in is part of the reason. But the other half of this is that we haven't been able to keep up with demand. Well, we just kept up with demand this last couple months. The price of housing has flattened, and my company's expanded massively, but we've got to get that. When supply meets demand, prices start to go down, and we can get these houses built out where they don't have a cost on an agricultural economy. Then we're making sense. We're planning for the real future. So that's my two thoughts. We can get the price down, and we need to push houses out to where it makes sense to put houses on, and not be filling up these corridors that are inside the agricultural corridor like we've been doing. It's poor planning, and I think there's some things that can be done to protect the agricultural industry. Not that they ask for it, but because we need that diversity in our economy. So thanks for that, Kevin. I appreciate the time.
Lee Joe, thank you for running for office, and we appreciate you, brother. Thanks.
Thank you.
Dimitri joins us now from Meridian with Kevin Miller on KIDO Talk Radio. Good morning, Dimitri.
Good morning, Kevin. So last week when I called, I mentioned the caravan. When it just started going, you said you didn't hear about it. I'm sure you've heard about it now.
Yes, I have, sir.
So, Kevin, I have just a simple question. So imagine that there's thousands of Russians pouring into Alaska. So what do you think would the leftists, how would they react?
Not like we're reacting.
That's what I'm saying. Can you explain to me why is that? I know that there would be a very vigorous, strong response, and maybe even military response, if something like that would happen on the border with Alaska. But when it's coming from the south, there is a lukewarm, almost non-existent response. Is that because it's been happening for a long time, or is it because of the cultural, historical precedents?
It's because
I'm just trying to understand.
Because the media has labeled anyone that speaks out against illegal immigration, racist, xenophobic, and anti-Latino.
So is it because Russians are white? That's why they would be against that? I mean,
it's okay to hate the Russians, not okay to hate the people that are not Russians. You see it like the 1970s and 80s movies where you had diversity of villains. Now all the villains are white guys, Russians, Germans, of that nature. It's a cultural shift, and the whole, idea of people should come here and the open borders front, that's really what it comes down to. I've been on TV shows where they've threatened to throw off guests who say illegal alien. And you have people.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. Well, it's for me, that's, of course, it's the way you're saying it's like leftists are having some kind of political schizophrenia, because they're talking about acceptance and tolerance. But again, for example, it's Russian Americans. There's 3 million Russian Americans in U.S. There's 3 million Muslims. And when's the last time you heard a Russian American committed some kind of atrocity? Blew up a building, cut somebody with a knife, attack somebody with a gun. I mean, it doesn't happen. Most Russian Americans, they're just hard workers. They keep their to themselves. But right now, as a Russian American, I've experienced in the last 3 years more hatred than I experienced ever in my life.
Well, that's because the media,
social media,
right? The media is anti-Russian too.
Yeah. Anytime on social media, I'm called all kinds of vile names. My Twitter account got suspended because people reported me as a Russian bot. And I was trying to reason with them. I said, look, a bot is a computer program. Do you really think I'm a computer program? I mean, there's no sense in them. They just scream Russian bot. I probably should change my nickname to Putin's lapdog, as I've been called that name so many times. And I've lived here for 20 years. I've never lived under Putin. But have you noticed that just because I have a Russian last name and a Russian-sounding first name, that's it. I'm guilty by association. If somebody could explain it to me, that would really be helpful, because it sounds like a mental illness.
It is, Dimitri. Got to run. Kevin Miller, KIDO Talk Radio. And before we get to traffic, let's squeeze in one more call. Jared in Nampa, good morning. You're on KIDO Talk Radio.
Hey, just a quick note. I definitely agree with what was said previously about Prop 2, and just kind of a secondary explanation for it. We look at our biggest debt that is decided by our people. It's homes. Then second, it's student loans. Student loans is the most supported thing by the government to help support the person and give them money. And the state, the schools will bump up the price of school based on how much they can afford to lift those prices based on how much support they get via the government. And they do the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid and the medical system. And so it's really important that we understand that cost doesn't balance out. What happens with Medicaid is they have a limitation of how much they can charge Medicare and Medicaid individuals. So in order to compensate the loss of income that they're making, they have to increase that to the general public. And that's what's causing the rise of cost. So if we continue to rise it up, it's not going to help us at all.
Jared, thank you for your insight on KIDO Talk Radio and your patience. Appreciate you, brother.